So, I have a problem. Thankfully, it's not a psychiatric one this time. I'm just lazy and need what I call an everything lens. I think when it comes to cameras, we want an everything version of whatever we're using. Since DSLRs became capable of taking videos, we've all been circle jerking about which camera is the ultimate body for hybrid shooters. Then Sony and Panasonic started stunting on all of us with mirrorless cameras like the A7 III or GH5. And suddenly you could take photos and videos in one camera without it looking like I mean, the GH5's autofocus was about as reliable as the Ford Ranger I bought on Craigslist, meaning completely useless, but 4K video you could actually color grade from a photo camera you didn't have to harvest your own organs to pay for was pretty amazing 6 years ago. Nowadays, we luckily don't have to worry as much about whether our cameras are photo or video first. Sony's a7 IV does a semi-professional job doing both, which is why I now owe $2,000 on a B&H credit card. Maybe I should sell my organs? But when it comes to cameras, the lens usually matters more than the body it attaches to. And people want a do-everything lens to go with their do-everything camera. For a hot minute, the answer has been a 24-105mm f4 lens from your Japanese dealer of choice. Or if you're feeling like a fancy a 24-70mm f2.8. These are great for any situation where you need both a wide angle and a morsel of telephoto just as a treat without changing lenses. If you aren't lazy like I am, you can usually just change lenses and get better results. But there's also situations where you might not have time to fumble around in a camera bag, like if you're working in wedding or event photography. Usually by hour 7 of Kaylee's barn wedding number 257, I'd throw on a 24-105mm on one camera and a 50mm f1.4 on the other while I quietly prayed to God to end my life right then and there. The problem was Kaylee Ann Lee Lynn doesn't know about wedding photography. Her wedding planner picked an unair-conditioned, poorly lit barn for an August wedding, and it's now 200 degrees and lit by LED e-waste candles. And what little lighting you could pull together, the DJ just won't stop with. So in those situations, I either had to try my best not to accidentally assault the client's friends and family with giant light stands, or I had to spend ages denoising every photo in a ton of software because these everything lenses aren't letting in enough light, and Topaz whatever the it's called Mark IV isn't that great at actually denoising a photo. Though I will say Photoshop and Lightroom's new beta has some amazing raw image denoiser, like with AI. It's really good, though I didn't have that like 2 years ago when I was doing wedding photography. I feel like I'm on a tangent now. Well, let's just say there are reasons beyond laziness behind the push for faster wide-angle zoom lenses on full-frame cameras, especially ones that don't bankrupt anyone who buys them. Also, even if you are okay with f4 being the fastest your lens gets, 24-105mm isn't exactly the most range. In my opinion, these lenses are very much a jack-of-all-trades situation. They don't really excel for any one situation because of all the compromises. If you want more telephoto than 105mm, you typically have to go for lenses that are telephoto only, like 100-400mm or 70-200mm. There's actually a pretty major lack of wide-angle telephoto lenses on full-frame mirrorless. I remember back in the DSLR era, I once used a Tamron 18-300mm for street photography. It was absolutely fantastic, and I replaced it with the Tamron 70-300mm f4-5.6 immediately. But at least you had these fantastic options on Canon DSLRs. On Sony full frame, all I found so far was the Sigma 60-600mm Triple XL Bad Dragon Edition, and since I'm in between sugar daddies, I ended up just buying the Sigma 100-400 and calling it a day. That was until I found out this lens existed, the Tamron 28-200mm f2.8-5.6 for Sony full frame. I'm not sure how I didn't notice this lens existed. It's probably because I've been avoiding Tamron since the 18-300mm I bought 8 years ago. Might as well have just been a few pieces of broken glass in a plastic tube covered in Vaseline as far as image quality goes. But maybe I just had a lemon or something, as Tamron is shaped up to be a really impressive company if you look at their current lineup. Most of their lenses share the same 67mm filter size, so you can easily share filters between your addiction collections. And they offer a 6-year warranty, which is pretty much unheard of in the lens industry. Tamron lenses also tend to be smaller than other lens makers like Sigma or even Sony themselves. Granted, I think that's in part because they do cut some corners. Like their Sony 70-200 f2.8 competitor is a 70-180 2.8, which also lacks the optical stabilization of the Sony version. That being said, the Tamron is smaller, lighter, and less than half the price. And when you're talking about lenses that cost multiple thousands of dollars, that's a really big achievement. Besides, as Tamron's website points out, this lens features shake-free shooting from the camera's body stabilizer. Which, like, yeah, I guess, but you're essentially just advertising a feature of some Sony cameras. This has almost nothing to do with the lens you're advertising. That being said, painting Tamron as a corner-cutting cheap lens company isn't telling the full story, as they do have their own technology and engineering process that's pretty special to them. Rather than figure out how to make certain lenses, some companies just call up Tamron and have them throw their engineers at it. The Nikon 28-75mm f2.8 is just a rebranded Tamron lens, and Sony has found it necessary to keep their position as Tamron's second largest shareholder. Since I've quit photography and have gone back to school full-time, I find myself really enjoying street photography again. I think it gives me the fun of candid photography without the experience of wanting to claw my own eyes out at weddings. With street photography, you generally don't want a large heavy lens, but often still need the range of a telephoto. There's two reasons why large lenses usually don't work for my street photography. First of all, after getting robbed last year, I don't want to be dripped out and please steal my camera merch. And two, I don't want to develop scoliosis from carrying around my Sigma lenses. This makes the Tamron 28-200mm a no-brainer due to the fact it's tiny for a lens with these specs. I mean, just look at it. Like, this is the telephoto I used to carry. Granted, it goes up to 400mm, but still, I usually only wanted to go up to 200mm. So, like, this is what we're dealing with here. You definitely can't take this one up your... Not to mention, this one steps down to f2.8, whereas this one, I don't remember. Okay, steps down to f5. For the record, the Sigma 100-400 is not a bad lens. Please sponsor me, Sigma. I actually love your lenses. It just isn't good for what I use it for because it's huge. f2.8 provides a shallower depth of field and much more light. Tamron claims this is the first all-in-one zoom lens to stop down to f2.8, though I'd be curious on how they define an all-in-one lens, but I'll just take their word for it because f2.8 is pretty rare on a telephoto. Even at the full 200mm, this is only going up to f5.6, which really isn't that bad. It still doesn't have any stabilization, which means your low light performance probably won't be as great in telephoto situations, but this is a $600 lens, so I'm not going to be picky here. Sure, $600 sounds like a lot, but for a full-frame telephoto, it really isn't much. At this price point, I wasn't expecting it to be weather sealed either, but apparently it is. With this feature set and price, I'll be happy if the image quality is usable, let alone good. And I'll be really happy if it gets me to sell my Sigma 100-400. Because I still do use it if I need a telephoto above 100mm, because it's the only lens I have that does that. Even though I only usually go up to 200mm, I don't really need 400, I'm not a wildlife photographer. So I decided to really put this lens to the test going to Boston's annual Pride event. Something like a Pride event is really the perfect use case for a lens like this. It's a situation where I'm rapidly alternating between wide angle and telephoto, and I'd want the background separation of shooting at low f-stops because of how busy the backgrounds will be, though that's relatively easy to achieve on a telephoto. So just like that, I was off to go disappoint the Lord. I decided to raw dog it and bring only the Tamron on my Sony a7 IV. Just kidding, I lied. I wasn't too confident I'd like this lens, so I brought a extra camera just in case with a spare lens for it. Speaking of bringing extra things, I wanted my photos to be a bit vibey, if you will, so instead of properly testing the lens like a normal person, I threw on a Tiffen ProMist filter immediately. So if you see a bit of bloom or haze in the photos, that's why. It's not the Tamron. I did test it later without the filter, and it doesn't have that characteristic naturally. Now, I'm usually someone who shows up late to literally everything. The first wedding job I ever did, I was like half an hour late to, but my husband is type A, so he dragged me there an hour before anyone else really showed up. So I spent the first hour around taking kind of boring photos around Boston Commons. The crowd filled in pretty quickly though. I actually really like this shot, even though I probably shouldn't. There's a bit too many distracting elements from the focal point of the photo, but this is still one of my favorites from the day. I ended up doing some sketchy shit and claiming a spot where this guy was sitting to get a better view of the parade, though I guess I should have just given less fucks and matched the feral energy of these people. The parade started off normally, but quickly took on a somber tone with a moment of silence. This unfortunately makes sense given recent situations with our community, but I decided to exploit that for cool photos, which is less morally questionable if you call yourself a photojournalist like I do. Jokes aside, these are some of my favorite photos from the entire day. I think as a photographer, I'm kind of at my strongest when I'm taking photos that look like they could be in a news article. Pride in general was a bit emotional this year, but I think that gave much needed depth to the event instead of the general, "Yas queen, sashay your way to climate doom and worker exploitation, girl!" that type of energy we had in the past at Pride events. Though honestly, I'll take vapid corporate support over no support. After a while, I was getting super overstimulated because I don't touch grass enough, but I powered through just in time for Senator Ed Markey to show up, which was pretty cool. The second the senator showed up, a small gaggle of professional photographers affiliated with the event just spawned out of nowhere and ran directly in front of me. How dare you? But I still managed to get a really good angle. I hope I didn't get in the way of anyone just trying to do their jobs. As if this event wasn't of the devil already, they made sure to bring it up a notch and bring out the leather pups. think that must have really set off God or something, because she decided to immediately change the weather. At first it was somewhat mild, but since that didn't scare us off, God decided to just throw the ocean on top of Boston just in time for Target to show up in all of their canceled Pride collection glory. This weather is homophobic, like for real. When I said I put this lens to the test, I meant it. I was really putting that 6-year warranty to good use for some of the last photos I took. After some of us scurried into the parking garage, I took a few wide-angle photos of Michael, and considering how bad the lighting was, the fact I could open this lens up to f2.8 was probably the sole reason these were usable. Right after I took these photos, the crusty old guy in the parking garage kicked us out, so we ran back to the car and left just in time for the storm to break. In the end, I took 500 photos over 5.5 hours, which I ended up editing 66 of, with about 13 of them being my favorites. I guess this is a good part of the video to mention I'm making prints available. You can get prints of photos from this video or anything else that I do that I think is portfolio worthy with the link in the description, so check that out if you're inclined. When editing the photos, I noticed just one issue. The photos straight out of camera lacked a bit of contrast for my taste, but that's probably just the ProMist filter. I may have overcompensated in my edits, but I like how the shots turned out, so that's good enough for me. I didn't notice any fringing, distortion, or really any signs that this lens has quality issues. For the entire event, I shot wide open, meaning my wide-angle shots were always f2.8 and my telephoto shots were closer to f5.6. Shooting wide open with a lens like this, I was really impressed with the sharpness of the photos. And all the photos had a perfect amount of background separation, though, to be fair, that's really easy to achieve with a telephoto. Also, unlike some third-party lenses, this lens has autofocus so good that I can't tell the difference between this and my G Master lenses. I have a feeling Sony is sharing focusing information with Tamron since they're partly owned by Sony. Overall, I have basically no complaints with this lens, which is not a conclusion I was expecting. My previous experiences with Tamron aside, I wouldn't have high expectations for a lens with this big of a focal range at this price. I do think this lens would have benefited from a stabilizer, but my camera's in-body stabilization did a good enough job for photos that I didn't feel like it was unusable like I would have if I was using a DSLR or something. So, to my knowledge, that makes this pretty much your only option if you want a wide-angle super zoom lens on a Sony full-frame body and can't spend used car money. I'm sure there'll be competitors for this lens soon, or maybe there already is and I just don't know about them, but I doubt they'll fall within the same price range or be as high quality or compact for street photography. Anyway, that'll be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.